All started one cold, thunderous night when Rene, the heroine, burst into Gauna's castle, ready for the takedown. Immediately upon seeing her, Gauna laughed hysterically and told her to save her last breath for the devil, because no excuse would save her from reuniting with her family in hell. But hearing those words, Rene got all emotional, and then started to remember how everyone in her life had stranded her. As a result of her uncontrolled emotions, Rene shouted back that she had never chosen to become a hero. All she had ever wanted was to do TikTok challenges like girls her age and not fight some Halloween-faced demon king. Overwhelmed with exhaustion, tears started to stream down Rene's face as she confessed that she wanted her miserable life to end already so she could join her parents on the highway to heaven. The following day, Rene lay on the bed with Gauna sitting right beside her. As Gauna stared at her unconscious body, he couldn't help but second-guess his life decision of deciding to take care of the hero he was supposed to rip to pieces. Suddenly, Rene's eyes fluttered open, and she groggily demanded to know if she was now in heaven. In response, Gauna replied that it would cost her an arm and a leg to enter heaven. Confused and disoriented, Rene's eyes widened in shock as she asked if demons were now allowed free passage into heaven. However, Gauna reminded the clueless Rugrat that all demons still stayed in hell and then explained to her that she was in a room in his castle after crying herself unconscious. Meanwhile, while talking, Gauna noticed Rene was lost in the soft moment, hugging the pillow so awkwardly like she hadn't touched anything soft in her hard life. However, Gauna cleared his throat to snap her out of the moment and then demanded to know her name. Rene introduced herself, and just as she did, Gauna called her by her name, about to say something before she cut him short. Tearfully, Rene said it had been ages since anyone called her by name. Only her clapped parents ever did. A bit startled, Gauna called her by her name for the second time more firmly and then delivered a shocker by informing her that henceforth, she would be living with him in his castle. Shortly afterwards, Gauna took Rene to a luxurious room in the mansion and told her that henceforth, the room was hers, adding that she was free to decorate it with a Barbie theme if she wanted. Upon hearing this, Rene froze on the spot, eyes wide in amazement. Stammering, she asked if he was serious, and Gauna, in full confidence, confirmed it without skipping a beat. Gauna then explained that he had been a die-hard fan of magic and had been studying it alone for years, but now he would love for Rene to be his assistant to help with his research. However, just then, he noticed Rene was stuck in some kind of glitch, standing there like a mannequin in a cursed baby clothing shop. With a sigh, Gauna tried to shake her back to consciousness but realized the midget had spaced out. So, as a gentle demon, he placed her on the bed and covered her with the bedsheet, knowing this journey to daddyhood was going to be a very long, bumpy ride. Several hours later, Gauna took Rene around, showing her the inner part of the demon castle. Although Gauna had made Rene his assistant, he still faced a major problem: how he was going to tell the other demons that Miss Hero was now a resident in his crib. Just as he was pondering how to solve the issue, two demons walked in. Upon seeing Rene, the demons, to Gauna's shock, immediately clocked her as the rumored hero. The skeleton demon then introduced himself as Bands, the captain of the demons' attack regiment, while the flying, ball-shaped demon introduced itself as the steward Crockwell. Intrigued, Gauna inquired how they knew Rene was in the castle. In response, Bands revealed that the barman had been running his mouth like a parrot, and now the whole castle was buzzing about the news of the hero chick in the castle. Then, Bands asked if Rene would be sticking around the castle full-time, to which Gauna replied that was indeed his intention. Instantly, Bands loses his chill and assured Rene she could rely on him if she was in trouble. Almost immediately, Crockwell jumped in, complimented Rene as being cute, and told her that if she had any questions, she was happy to be of help. Gauna then asked Bands why he had failed to attack Rene the first time he saw her approaching the castle. In response, Bands revealed that when he first spotted Rene approaching the castle from the rooftop, he froze upon seeing her determination and the aura she was emitting. Consequently, he couldn't engage and instead decided to inform the Demon Lord. Later that night, after giving Rene a tour of the castle, Gauna asked her if there was anything she wanted to talk about or needed. Hesitantly, Rene replied that all she wanted was a wall clock. Stunned by the response, Gauna inquired what she needed the wall clock for, to which Rene informed him that by state orders, she had to train like Baki Hanma for 10 hours as the hero. So, the following morning, Bands was shocked when he noticed that the wall clock in the corridor had gone missing. Initially, he thought some useless thief had been bold enough to have stolen the devil's clock. but Crockwell quickly clarified that it must have been the Demon Lord himself because the day before, Galma had been searching the entire castle like a maniac for a clock. Meanwhile, in Rene's room, Galma pointed out that since Rene would be helping him with his research, it might be difficult for her to do so while wearing so much plot armor. Abruptly, he called out to someone named Raizru, and after a brief moment, an elf chick in a maid uniform walked in, bowing her head and apologizing for taking so long to reply. Calmly, Galma responded that it was fine, and then introduced Raizru to Rene as the head maid in charge of managing the castle. Turning to Raizru, Galma introduced Rene to her as his assistant. Following the introduction, Raizru immediately grabbed Rene in her enormous head, sympathizing with her in tears for the death of her parents and all the hardships she must have endured in life. Cutting short the emotional moment, Galma then instructed Raizru to arrange a spare maid's uniform for Rene so she could change into it. Regrettably, Raizru informed Galma that they were lacking dwarf outfits in the castle, and suggested he look for one in Kevin Hart's closet. Instantly, Galma dismissed her stupid suggestion and decided to flex his DIY skills, sewing Rene an outfit instead. After several hours, Rene was seen wearing a maid's outfit perfectly tailored to her adult baby size. Upon seeing her, Raizru couldn't help but compliment how kinky and petite she looked, causing Rene to bow her head, blushing hard. Enthusiastically, Raizru even suggested Rene become one of her maid corps, but Galma shut her down almost immediately. Later that day, Rene met up with Galma in his room, and in tears, she told him that someone as unloved as her shouldn't be allowed to wear such an amazing dress. Gently, in response, Galma pointed out that doing magic research while wearing her plot armor would be incredibly difficult for her. Additionally, Galma added that it was essential she had work clothes, but Rene countered with a different opinion, worrying she might get the beautiful dress dirty while working. Sensing that he couldn't change the little honey badger's mind on the issue, Galma reassured her it was fine and then mentioned that, in case of emergencies, he had also made a uniform from the leftover material used for the dress. Proudly displaying a dress worthy of a Disney princess, Galma suggested Rene could make that dress her work clothes instead. Overwhelmed, Rene nearly had a heart attack upon seeing the burgundy dress and instantly changed her mind, declaring she preferred to work in the dress she was already wearing. In the next scene, Galma took Rene to the castle's large underground library. There, he explained that all the necessary materials and magic tomes needed for their research could be found within its walls. Then, out of curiosity, Galma asked Rene if she could read. A bit irritated, Rene replied that even though she might look like she had the brain power of Tickle Me Elmo, she had actually been taught how to read and write when she was still in diapers. Pleased to hear this, Galma said that was great, and then suggested they could start with a little crash course on Magic 101. To begin, Galma explained that to achieve knowledge of magical science, it was crucial to gain a massive understanding, and as his assistant, Rene would need to engage in dark sorcery, which meant she'd have to be educated. Piling up numerous Illuminati books in front of her, Galma instructed Rene to start digging into them. Completely awestruck, Rene tried to ask something, but Galma began walking out of the library, sternly instructing her to read the books properly. Several hours later, Galma returned to the library, apologizing for keeping Rene waiting. However, just then, he noticed that Rene was completely immersed in a demonic book, reading it so intently like the next Stephen King's novel, which surprised him. Quietly, he took some books, gently placed them on the desk, and joined her in reading. Nevertheless, it didn't take long for Galma to inform Rene that it was almost time for supper. A week passed, and while strolling in the passage, Galma reflected on how Rene had stayed in the castle for a week. Yet he felt she was still too reserved, as if she didn't belong there. Suddenly, just then, Rene walked into the castle clutching a towel, and upon seeing her, Galma asked what she had gone out for so early in the morning. Casually, Rene replied that she had gone to the nearby river. Shocked and curious, Galma inquired if she had gone to the river to take a bath, to which Rene, quivering, nodded her head in affirmation. Surprised at hearing this, Galma wondered why she would decide to act like some homeless trailer park sicko, and if he hadn't told her about the bath inside the castle. So, to confirm, he asked if she had been bathing at the river ever since arriving at the castle, to which Rene immediately answered yes. Rene added that she had been going there every day, her words striking Galma like a blade to the chest. Furthermore, Rene explained that the water in the river was really chilled, which she liked not just for bathing but also for washing her dirty clothes. Tenderly, in response, Galma caressed her face and noticed she was as cold as an ice fish. So without hesitation, he carried her like a baby, shocking Rene, and began walking straight to the bathroom while announcing to all the servants to prepare hot water for bathing. 10 minutes later, Gauma and Rene waited in the corridor while the servants in the castle prepared a hot water bath for Rene. However, another problem bothering Gauma was how to ensure Rene actually took the bath. Secretly, Gauma worried that if Rene entered the bath alone, she might not do anything and return still smelling worse than a dead skunk bee hole. Initially, he wanted one of the maids to bathe with her, but all the maids were busy. Just then, the smiley emoji demon walked in, asking Gauma if everything was okay. Receiving no response from Gauma, Crockwell mentioned she had heard about the issue of who would accompany Rene to bathe and then willingly offered to be that person. Meanwhile, Gauma was lost in thought, considering how he would have bathed Rene himself, but feared everyone would think he was not only a demon, but also a creepy pre-K predator. With relief, Gauma accepted Crockwell's offer to bathe with Rene, but only on the condition that she transformed into her original form. Swiftly, using his demonic powers, Gauma transformed Crockwell into an emo gothic chick with horns, and upon seeing the new Crockwell, Rene couldn't believe her eyes. Defensively, Crockwell explained that she spent most of her time as a smiley face and saw no need to be this emo girl. Wasting no time, Crockwell excitedly drew close to Rene, declaring she couldn't wait to have so much fun bathing with her. Noticing Crockwell's enthusiasm, Gauma grabbed her hand, cast a magic spell that engraved a demonic symbol on it, and then warned her that he had just cast a spell that would inflict 1,000 years of pain if she tried rubbing vages with Rene. With that settled, Crockwell and Rene walked into the castle bathhouse, which had been meticulously prepared by the castle staff. Stepping inside the plush bathhouse, Crockwell welcomed an awestruck Rene to spa hell, and then suggested they immediately start warming up their flat bodies. Meanwhile, Rene, overwhelmed by such luxury, protested that she wasn't deserving of such baby girl lifestyle and insisted she was fine bathing with just a rusty bucket and warm water. Dismissing her words, Crockwell stepped forward, stretched out her hand, and invited Rene to enter the water together. Sensing Rene's hesitation, Crockwell lashed her tail out like a demonic lasso, whipped it around her, and together they yeeted into the bathwater. Relaxing in the warm water, Crockwell immediately remarked how heavenly the experience felt but quickly snapped out of it, remembering she was supposed to be a useless demon. After a brief moment of silence, Crockwell grew serious and asked Rene how she was enjoying life at the castle after staying for over a week. Reassuringly, Crockwell told Rene she would be her horned Dr. Phil and Rene could confide in her. With her head bowed emotionally, Rene opened up, admitting there was one thing bothering her that she didn't quite understand. Rene, feeling quite nervous and embarrassed, then asked Crockwell if it was okay for her as the people's hero to live rent-free in the demon's headquarters. Crockwell replied saying she had always expected that one day that question would come up. In addition, Crockwell in turn curiously asked Rene if Gauna wasn't the one who asked her to be his assistant. Hesitantly, Rene responded that, although she was Gauma's assistant, she hadn't actually done anything to assist him. Overcome with emotion, Rene confessed that everyone in the castle had been so nice to her, which made her feel guilty because she couldn't give anything in return. Curious, Crockwell asked Rene if she really wanted to stay in the castle, and as Rene tried to answer, she glitched like a poorly developed NPC, leading Crockwell to conclude that Rene hadn't fully made up her mind. To help, Crockwell inquired what Rene thought of Lord Gauma, Bans, Ryzeru the maid, and in fact everyone else in the castle. Candidly, Rene confessed that whenever she was with Gauma, she felt a warm sensation in her chest that made her inner thighs mushy, though she struggled to express it in words. Delighted upon hearing this, Crockwell expressed her gladness that Rene had finally opened up. So, Crockwell told Rene that she was relieved that she didn't hate them, to which Rene replied saying she couldn't possibly hate them because they were way nicer than her village people. Crockwell then gently placed her hand on Rene's head and then said with everything she had heard from her, it only showed that it was right for her to be in the castle. Furthermore, Crockwell mentioned that since everyone in the castle liked her, then there was no need for Rene to worry. That said, Crockwell embraced Rene and told her that if she left, she would return back to be a lonely psychopath. With all the pent-up emotions sorted out, Crockwell stood and suggested that, since their bodies were now warm, she'd love to wash Rene's hair as her big sister. Rene insisted she could do it herself, but Crockwell grabbed her hand and urged her not to be too reserved. However, in the process of lifting Rene, her towel dropped, exposing her flat plywood chest in full light. Tempted, Crockwell tried to get handsy with Rene's buns, but before she could, the engraved pattern on her hand began to glow. At that moment, Galma appeared in the bathroom, swiftly scooped up Rene, and sternly warned Crockwell, who had somehow reverted to her slimy form, that if she ever laid hands on Rene, he would penetrate inside her and break her pelvis. After the bath, Crockwell, now in her human form, guided Rene to the changing room and cautioned her that the room was separated by gender so she shouldn't wander into the wrong one. Just then, Crockwell spotted a bottle half filled with a liquid near the hand washer, which she recognized as her hair growth solution. Instantly, she noticed that the solution had been used by someone, and instinctively, she deduced that the only weirdo who'd do that was the bald, skeletal-headed creep, Bands. Puzzled, however, she wondered what in the world a skeleton head would want with a hair growth solution since, obviously, no matter how hard Bands tried, he'd never be Bruno Mars. So, to teach the bald psycho a lesson, Crockwell decided it would be best to replace it with some hair removal solution instead. Several hours later, Galma and Rene sat in the library studying as usual, but Rene was visibly tense and couldn't help clenching her fist from the strain. Unable to hold back her emotions any longer, Rene blurted out that she'd love to do some work around the house. Stunned by her sudden request, Galma tried explaining that acquiring knowledge was also work, but Rene protested, insisting that sitting and reading all day like a dusty encyclopedia didn't feel right at all. Furthermore, Rene argued that she should at least take care of cleaning her room and washing her clothes instead of leaving it for the maids to handle. Seeing her persistence, Galma had no choice but to agree, though he was reluctant to entrust her with so many tasks. Promptly, Galma called for a maid named Raizru, and when the striking demon maid entered the library, he informed her that Rene would be helping the maids with the work that day. However, while Galma spoke, Raizru busied herself, stuffing candies into Rene's mouth like she was some chipmunk, though Galma droned on, warning Raizru to avoid giving Rene any tasks involving fire or sharp objects. Meanwhile, Rene was completely blown away by how delicious the candy tasted, and as Galma finished laying out the instructions, Raizru responded that she understood everything and would take special care of Rene. With that, Galma and the girls began walking to the courtyard, and as they strolled, Galma informed Raizru that Rene would start by helping out in the laundry department. Upon entering the courtyard, Galma turned to Rene and asked if it was her first time visiting a courtyard. However, before Rene could respond, a hyperactive blonde maid named Eru came running toward them. The second Eru laid eyes on Rene. She excitedly asked if Rene was the hero everyone had been gossiping about. Rene confirmed that she was and then introduced herself. Eru also cheerfully introduced herself as the maid in charge of the laundry department. Realizing Eru was the one washing her smelly undies, Rene bowed her head in gratitude and apologized for putting her through such a traumatizing experience. But instantly, Eru grew emotional and hugged Rene out of nowhere while pleading with Galma to let Rene join her laundry department permanently, to which Galma firmly disagreed. Meanwhile, watching Eru hugging Rene like a clingy love interest sparked immediate jealousy in Raizru, and in a burst of uncontrolled envy, Raizru called Eru a selfish wench before declaring she'd be leaving with Rene. However, at that moment, 3 other maids spotted Galma with the girls and immediately rushed to meet them. One of the maids, named Mary, upon getting close, hugged Rene out of nowhere, but Galma, irritated by the soap opera unfolding before his eyes, yelled, demanding to know what all the maids were doing there. Calmly, Mary explained that they had finished their morning chores and had been looking for Eru to join them for lunch. After that, she stepped up to Galma and playfully accused him of hiding the hero from them. Feeling guilty, Galma then ordered Raizru to go ahead and introduce everyone. Promptly, Raizru began with Mary, introducing her as the head maid in charge of the cooking department. Next, she introduced an elf maid named Mina as the head maid overseeing the security department. Finally, she presented another maid, Tika, as the head maid responsible for the cleaning department. However, before Rene could so much as open her mouth to introduce herself, Mary, like a true fangirl, grabbed her head, pressed it against her pleasure hill, and excitedly declared she'd been dying to meet her. Greening with envy, the rest of the girls called Mary selfish and joined in the group hug, nearly suffocating Rene. Desperately gasping for air like a fish out of water, Rene started crying out for Galma to save her from this aggressively affectionate death trap. But instead of stepping in like a responsible adult, Galma, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment, got all up in his feelings and started crying worse than her. After the drama subsided, Eru demanded to know why Galma had asked for her. Gauna then explained that as the maid in charge of laundry, he wanted to let her know that Rene would be assisting with the laundry. Surprised by this news, Iru sought confirmation, asking if Rene would truly be joining them in the maid unit. Before Galma could clarify it was a one-day gig, Iru erupted in excitement, shouting that, at last, they'd be able to make use of it finally. Baffled, Galma demanded to know what the hell it was, to which Iru dramatically dressed Rene in a maid outfit and revealed that they'd been planning the wardrobe change all along. Blushing, visibly embarrassed, Rene muttered that the maid outfit forced upon her fit perfectly. However, noticing how short the dress was, Galma swiftly whipped out his scissors like some tailor god and adjusted it, lengthening the hem. Watching Gauna worry over Rene like she was some fragile princess, the maids couldn't help but giggle, pointing out that Gauna was acting exactly like an overprotective dad on prom night. Sometime later, while Iru and Rene hung the washed clothes on the rope, Iru recalled the instructions Galma had given her to demonstrate the role of each maid corps division to Rene. Consequently, after they swiftly finished hanging the clothes, Rene asked for the next task, stunning Iru, who hadn't expected her to work at such ultra speed. Promptly, for the next task, Iru instructed her to bring in the dried sheets, and upon hearing this, Rene dashed off with lightning speed to carry it out. Alarmed, Iru chased after her almost immediately and urged her to slow down the pace at which she was working. Undeterred, Rene assured her she was fine and then zoomed off again. Later that day, inside the castle, Rene reflected on how Gauma and his staff had been nothing but kind to her. Thus, while hanging back the washed curtains, Rene resolved to repay the kindness and love shown to her. Suddenly, at that moment, Raizru entered, and upon seeing Rene hanging the curtains, she was impressed and finally understood why Gauma always wanted to protect Rene. She thought it must be because he saw her as special. After finishing with the laundry department, Rene met up with Mina to gain experience working with the security team as well. So, Mina, the head maid of the security team, explained that the sole job of the security team was to guard the castle. For today's crash course, Mina informed Rene that they'd be patrolling to make sure everything was running smoothly. She added that most of their job boiled down to whether or not they ran into an intruder during their rounds. Reassuringly, however, Mina told Rene that since she'd been guarding the Demon Lord's castle, she'd rarely seen an intruder. Right as those words left her mouth, her calm buzzed. A fellow maid frantically reported that the castle's protective barrier had reacted and something was attacking from above. Swiftly, Mina grabbed her long hammer and, with a smile, told Rene it was perfect timing to witness the security defense in action. Together, they hurried outside the castle, and upon stepping out, Rene looked up, shocked to see a dragon hovering in the sky. But Mina quickly clarified that it was actually a wyvern and explained that it was likely a young one that had wandered off, trying to carve out a little territory for itself, unaware it had flown to the boss's castle. Gripping her long hammer with a smirk, Mina eagerly stated that it had been ages since the security team got any action, and then cautioned Rene to stand back, as it might be dangerous. Spotting the wyvern approaching them at full speed, Mina quickly instructed Rene to duck. As the wyvern lunged toward them with fierce momentum, Mina smirked like someone under the influence of crack and boldly shouted, daring the wyvern to come at her with everything it had. Suddenly, however, someone snapped their fingers like Thanos, and the entire castle plunged into a nightmarish darkness. Alarmed, the girls grew frightened, wondering if the boogeyman was coming for them. Just then, the image of a giant, 1,000-foot dragon loomed behind the castle, and upon seeing it, the wyvern froze in pure shock and fled for its life. With the wyvern gone, the castle returned to normal, but Mina was furious when she looked up at the rooftop and realized Gauma was behind the boogeyman horror show. Angrily, Mina shouted at Gauma, demanding to know why he'd scared the wyvern away and taken over her job. But Gauma quickly vanished faster than her used panties on eBay, clearly avoiding any explanation. Turning to Rene, Mina shamefully apologized for not being able to show off her Black Widow fighting skills. But Rene responded that there was nothing to be ashamed of, as Mina had saved her and protected herself, too. Gazing at Mina, Rene, out of nowhere, told her she looked just like Kim Kardashian, causing Mina to blush redder than a tomato. Overwhelmed, unable to contain her emotions, Mina gave Rene a warm embrace, trying to hide how flustered she was. Next up were kitchen duties with Mary, who was thrilled to have Rene in the kitchen. Before they began, Mary explained that the cooking unit's job was to prepare meals for the entire castle and manage food resources. However, at that moment, Mary recalled that they'd run out of ingredients, and Gauma wouldn't allow them to use just any random stuff for cooking. since there weren't many ingredients available. Mary initially decided it was best to engage Rene in a girl-to-girl chat before her next task came up. However, seeing how eager Rene was to work, Mary resolved to make do with whatever ingredients were left in the kitchen. Mary knew her cooking skills weren't on par with Gordon Ramsay's, which was why she always put in extra effort. Yet she still felt something was missing, and the other maids wouldn't tell her the truth about her cooking to spare her feelings. So, Mary informed Rene that she'd make something nice for her and simply asked for her honest opinion, to which Rene agreed. After a while, Mary presented a strawberry tart and then requested Rene's honest feedback. Tasting a spoonful, Rene found the divine flavor nearly paralyzing her brain cells. Delighted by how much Rene enjoyed it, Mary beamed and eagerly offered to bring some more. The final maid task of the day was cleaning duties with a stern Tika. Without delay, Tika dove straight into explaining that the cleaning unit's duty was to scrub every nook and cranny of the castle thoroughly. Sternly, however, Tika warned Rene that she had zero tolerance for lazy dumps and wouldn't be as lenient as the other maids. Nervously, Rene assured Tika she'd be the best cleaner she had ever seen. To begin, Rene was handed 2 buckets of water and instructed to start with the windows and candle holders. But then, Tika noticed how close to the ground Rene was, making her realize that it would be mission impossible for Rene to clean the entire window from top to bottom. Consequently, Tika advised Rene to clean only as high as her height permitted. Determined, Rene grabbed a ladder to compensate for her Smurf stature. Just then, before she could start cleaning the window, Tika inquired about her age, and Rene replied that she was 12 years old. Nodding, Tika remarked that, as expected, Rene was much younger than all the maids, and then she sharply asked why Rene addressed them so casually. Startled, Rene immediately began apologizing, suggesting someone of her class shouldn't speak to them so informally. Firmly, Tika corrected her, clarifying that it wasn't about class, but about seniority, and then she instructed Rene never to address her by her first name. Meanwhile, sitting in his office, Gauma pondered what might have driven Rene to want to work as a maid. On one hand, he was delighted that Rene had finally grown comfortable enough with him to express her intentions. Still, he couldn't shake the guilt of allowing her to work as a maid in his castle. Nevertheless, seeing how eager Rene was to take on the role, Gauma concluded that the best decision was to let her work alongside the maids. Suddenly, at that moment, the maids burst into his office, dragging Rene along like a prized trophy, while proclaiming that they all wanted her to join them because of her hard work. Taken aback, Gauma had no choice but to agree to let Rene become part of their team, though he firmly urged the maids to take good care of her as a newly recruited teammate. With that settled, Gauma announced to the maids that since Rene would be joining a maid unit, he wanted to know what they intended for her to do. Promptly, Iru declared that it wasn't about making Rene do anything. Rather, she simply wanted to take care of her and spoil her. Almost immediately, Mary chimed in, expressing that all she desired was for Rene to taste her cooking every day and offer honest opinions. Before Mary could finish, Mina interjected, saying she'd love for her and Rene to guard the castle together. Finally, Tika added that, being older, she'd like to teach Rene how to dress like a proper woman and stop looking like a homeless schizo. Meanwhile, as the maids raved excitedly about whose unit Rene would join, Rene could only watch in confusion. Later that night, while washing Rene's hair, Crockwell, the mischievous imp, curiously inquired how Rene had helped the maids earlier that day. Sighing, Rene responded that Eru and the other maids were all very kind, but she wasn't happy because, despite her intention to help, she hadn't actually assisted in any meaningful way. Instead, she felt she'd just been a bother. After finishing with Rene's hair, Crockwell casually pointed out that, in her opinion, she fully supported Rene joining the maids unit. Abruptly changing the subject, Rene, looking desperate to work, dropped a surprising request, asking Crockwell if she'd allow her to wash her scrawny body. Caught off guard, the cultured demon hesitated, but before Rene could retract her request, the eager leprechaun quickly seized the opportunity, assuring her she was fine with it. Gleefully, Crockwell even added that people actually paid money for cute little girls to wash their bodies. Hearing the word money sparked a 500 IQ idea in Rene's mind. Consequently, the following morning, she rushed to Gauma's office and eagerly asked if she could earn money by washing everyone's bodies in the castle. Stunned, the nonsense suggestion nearly fried Gauma's brain cells. Instantly, he realized no one other than that meddling chihuahua, Crockwell, could be responsible for planting such a ridiculous idea in Rene's gullible head. Furious beyond measure, Gauma moved to confront the gremlin and teach her a deep lesson, but Rene clung to his cloak, pleading with him not to go. Later that afternoon, while Rene and Galma studied in the library, Mary burst in, announcing that she'd brought lunch. Gratefully, Galma thanked her and remarked that he'd eat soon before the food got cold. Meanwhile, Rene greeted Mary, and as soon as Mary laid eyes on Rene in her Lady Gaga-inspired outfit, she couldn't resist hugging her and exclaiming how adorable she looked. Curiously, Mary demanded to know when Rene had visited a Gucci store without her knowing. Smiling, Rene explained with a flashback that days earlier, Galma had crafted the dress for her, though it hadn't sat right with her because she couldn't fathom why Galma kept making New York fashion runway dresses for a flat surfboard like her. Gently, however, Galma calmed her by clarifying that for every newcomer in the castle, various dresses were made until the perfect style for that person was found. Furthermore, Galma elaborated that determining the clothing for each individual in the castle was a process of trial and error. After this explanation, Rene finally understood better, so she bowed and apologized to Galma for being such an ungrateful brat. Kindly, Galma, ever the gentle and understanding demon daddy, reassured her not to worry and affirmed that everything was fine. Returning to the present, Galma instructed Mary to serve lunch, and upon reaching the table, Mary, like a continental chef, announced they'd be having macaroni with seafood. Upon seeing the Instagram-worthy dish, Rene's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. Noticing how Rene stared at the food, lost in thought as if she'd an extraordinary glimpse of Beyonce's privates, Mary encouraged her to dive right in. Nervously, however, Rene exclaimed that she couldn't possibly eat all the food by herself. Surprised, Mary asked Galma if he'd been forcing Rene to eat all this time. Honestly, Galma explained through a flashback that when Rene first arrived at the castle, she'd struggled terribly with eating and just wanted to die. He and Raizru had to force-feed her to ensure she ate. Yet Rene still rejected the food, insisting that a dirty pest like her wasn't worthy of such a pristine dish fit only for someone like Donald Trump. Patiently, Galma urged her to relax and clarified that the dish wasn't expensive at all. It was just a common meal with a perfect taste. When Rene finally took a bite, her eyes widened in surprise at how delicious it was. Back in the present, Galma confided in Mary that getting Rene to the point where she could finally eat had been no easy feat, to which Mary comforted him, praising his resilience since being a devoted father was no simple task. After the remarkable lunch, Galma thanked Mary for being an exceptional chef. Graciously, Mary accepted his thanks but noted that something else was troubling her. Sensing the seriousness in Mary's expression, Galma grew deeply concerned and promptly demanded to know what the problem was. Hesitantly, Mary responded that the issue wasn't about her but about Mina. She elaborated that since Galma hadn't been relying on Mina to protect the castle, Mina had sunk into a deep depression, feeling utterly useless. To address this, Mary suggested that Galma assign more tasks to Mina to lift her out of her slump. Reflecting on this, Galma recalled how he'd often restrained Mina from carrying out her duties by taking on enemies she could likely handle herself. He'd done so thinking he was shielding her from harm, but in reality, he'd only wounded her pride. Thoughtfully, Galma reasoned that in the future, he should learn to trust his workers with responsibilities as their master. After this introspection, Galma assured Mary that he understood her concerns and would definitely speak with Mina, earning her gratitude. However, Galma added that, given the strength of the monsters around the castle, he'd need to provide Mina with proper training and assess her combat abilities. Shifting gears, Mary mentioned she had another concern bothering her. Before Galma could ask what it was, she quickly explained that she was having issues with her work clothes. The following morning at the library, Rene stared oddly at a page in a book, prompting Gano to notice, and then asked why she had been staring at the same page, as if she was struggling to comprehend what was writing in it. Startled by his sudden question, Rene frantically explained that it wasn't a matter of understanding, but rather that the painting on the page was so beautiful she couldn't overlook it, making her wonder who the Picasso was that drew such an amazing masterpiece. Hearing this, Gano, intrigued, responded by asking Rene if she had ever painted in her short life. In response, Rene revealed that she hadn't painted before but had scribbled on a chalkboard. Surprised at her response, Gano replied declaring that day he was going to teach Rene how to draw, leaving the girl totally shocked. However, there was one tiny problem. Gano pondered where he could get a nice motif for the drawing. Gazing at Rene, Gano reasoned she would make the perfect muse. So he quickly dressed her up and then placed her gently on a large cube box, instructing her not to move, even if she had to scratch her mushy area. As they prepared for the art lesson, Bands, holding a glass slab overhead, asked if the lighting was adequate. and Gaumer replied that it was perfect. With everything in place, Gaumer requested Crockwell and Reiseru to hand him the drawing tools, and with Rene sitting poised like the perfect Mona Lisa, Gauna assured her that the painting would be the greatest the world had ever seen. As Gauma began sketching, Rene watched intently, clearly eager to see the result. In the next scene, Crockwell strolled outside the castle and spotted Bands and his squad of skullheads playing a flower game with Rene. Enthusiastically, Bands had crafted a beautiful corolla from flowers and presented it to Rene, declaring it a gift from him, to which Rene gratefully thanked him. Likewise, the other two skeletal heads made a bracelet and necklace for Rene and offered them to her. Just then, a butterfly fluttered their way, and Bands suggested they take a closer look at it. Abruptly, however, having seen enough, Crockwell interrupted, shouting at Bands and demanding to know why he and his bonehead colleagues were playing a silly flower game with Rene. Calmly, Bands explained that Gauma had gone out to gather materials for new maid outfits and had asked him and his biology project homeboys to keep Rene company until he returned. As a result, they'd decided to make floral decorations with her. Irritated, Crockwell yelled, questioning if there weren't better things to play with besides flowers. She suggested they could have opted for a PS5 or even card games, to which Bands replied that they'd initially started with card games, but he'd grown tired of beating Rene so badly, and his bony heart ached to see her look like a rejected bride. The following day at the library, Rene rested her head on the desk, exhausted from hours of studying. Just then, Gauma walked in and announced they'd continue with the painting studies. Emphasizing the importance, Gauma stressed that Rene needed to become the next Leonardo da Vinci to unlock numerous job opportunities, to which Rene replied that she understood and would do her best. To kick off the painting class, Gauma clarified that before he could teach her, he'd first evaluate her current painting skills. For this, Gauma instructed Rene to try her hand at a still life drawing of an apple placed in front of her. Eagerly, Rene agreed and immediately began sketching on the canvas. Shortly afterwards, Rene handed Gano a sketch of an apple that looked like SpongeBob vomited on canvas and immediately started crying and apologizing for wasting his time and canvas. Surprisingly, however, Gauma proclaimed it the best drawing he'd ever seen, second only to I Show Speed's self-portrait. While Rene stared at Gauma with a dumbfounded expression, Gano explained that her art boasted originality and vibrant colors. Proudly, Gauma then hung Rene's piece on the wall for everyone in the castle to admire, leaving her utterly embarrassed. As the skeletal demons in the castle began praising the artwork like it was Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl performance, Rene's embarrassment soared. Overwhelmed, she quickly hid behind the curtains while the maids tried coaxing her out, simultaneously pleading with Gauma to take down the portrait. Sometime later that day, Reiseru stood in Gauma's office, delivering a daily report on the maids' activities and how their units were being managed by the heads. However, she highlighted that Mary, in charge of the cooking unit, had informed her that the kitchen stock was depleted and needed replenishing. Upon hearing this, Gauma briefly considered letting Bands and his squad of boneheads handle the food shortage, but ultimately decided to take care of it himself. Consequently, that evening, Gauma brought Rene to the riverside and told her they'd be catching fish together. Curiously, Gauma asked Rene if she had any fishing experience, to which she replied that long ago, her father had taught her how to fish, and after he left to get milk and never returned, she'd had to fish for her own survival. Impressed, Gauma remarked that Rene didn't need fishing lessons, so they could dive right in. Before they began, however, Gauma revealed to Rene that a particularly large fish inhabited the river, adding that it'd be thrilling if they could catch it, to which Rene promised to do her best. An hour passed without a single fish caught, leaving Rene visibly tense. Desperately, she started frantically shaking the fishing rod in the water, and noticing her anxiety, Gauma approached her, urging her to relax. Gently, he explained that savoring the moment was a key part of the fishing experience's charm. Sincerely, Rene admitted that all she wanted was to catch a bunch of fish to bring back so everyone who'd been caring for her at the castle could enjoy barbecued fish for dinner. Seeing her determination, Gauma stepped forward and declared that, in that case, he had no choice but to intervene. Dramatically, he stretched his hand over the water, and instantly, a dark aura began emanating from his palm. With his hand hovering over the river, Gauma instructed Rene to cover her ears, and once she complied, a massive surge of electricity blasted the river, sending water erupting into the sky. When the water settled, Rene stood shocked to see a huge number of dead fish floating on the surface. Satisfied, Gauma remarked that with so many fish now at their disposal, they wouldn't have to worry about fish anymore. Suddenly, however, a ferocious giant fish with sharp fangs leapt out of the water, poised to swallow them whole. Terrified, Rene froze, but Galma calmly assured her that luck was on their side as they were about to land an impressive catch. Without hesitation, Galma summoned a dark aura that instantly froze the river and the fish simultaneously, leaving Rene utterly stunned. After that incredible display, Galma told Rene they'd be having a fish feast for dinner. Additionally, he turned to her and noted that everyone in the castle would rejoice upon seeing their catch, which thrilled Rene beyond measure. Later that day, Mary stormed into Galma's office and declared that from now on, she'd appoint herself as Rene's personal instructor. Taken aback, Galma demanded to know if she was high on some cheap crack or something. Firmly, Mary replied that she'd been thinking for a while and, although Rene was hardworking, she was still a child who needed to be taught common sense and how to navigate the world. Nodding, Galma agreed she was right. But before he could finish, Mary interrupted, arguing that with Rene spending most of her time with his boring self, she'd hardly get the chance to experience normal life with ordinary people. Pressing on, Mary insisted that Rene should have opportunities to interact with others in the castle. Galma opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Mary added that his freaky delusions were rubbing off on Rene, hindering her connection to the real world. Furthermore, Mary expressed her fear that if things continued this way, Rene might turn into a psychopath with zero social skills. Continuing her tirade, Mary pointed out that Galma was a delusional demon who'd even told them to cook without heat or knives, which had prevented her from teaching Rene anything useful in the kitchen. Surprised by this, Galma magically transformed his hand into a chopping stick and, with a flick of magic, conjured fire to prepare a dish. Smugly, he told Mary that cooking without heat or knives was indeed possible. Exasperated, Mary shouted that ordinary people couldn't just chop vegetables with their hands or grill meat with their palms. With her hands on her hips, Mary asserted that Galma wasn't the best teacher for Rene. But before she could finish, Eru appeared behind her, startling Mary completely. Whispering in her ear, Eru asked if she'd heard correctly that Mary had called Galma a whack teacher. Flustered, Mary tried to explain herself, but Eru scolded her, saying that as a maid, it was improper to discredit her master. Early the following morning, Mina, strolling along the corridor, noticed Rene approaching her. After exchanging greetings, she observed that Rene was dressed in her Sunday best and asked where she was headed. Cheerfully, Rene replied that she was running errands with Galma. Noticing how light Rene's dress was, Mina advised her to change into something thicker, as it was colder than the North Pole outside. However, Rene showed her a glowing crystal she'd received from Galma, and seeing Mina's curiosity, she explained that Galma had said it was a stone imbued with magic to protect its holder from harsh weather. Intrigued, Mina remarked that the stone must be worth more than a Tesla truck, to which Rene nodded and admitted she'd initially hesitated to accept it, thinking it was incredibly expensive. Just then, Galma entered the scene and clarified to the girls that the stone wasn't anything remarkable, just a common find from where he'd lived long ago. Further, he elaborated that once imbued with magic, these stones could be used for many things. Turning to Mina, Galma then informed her that once he returned from errands, he'd like to have a word with her. Surprised by Galma's serious tone, Mina assured him there was no problem. Nodding, Galma responded with a simple, "Very well," then urged Rene to leave with him, bidding Mina farewell as they departed. Thoughtfully, Mina stood watching Galma and Rene go, wondering what issue prompted Galma to request a serious talk. Then she mused about the stone, wishing she could have one herself. Suddenly, Raizuru appeared behind her, snapping her out of her thoughts and teasing that there was no way she'd get one, startling Mina. Casually, Raizuru handed Mina a strange book and asked her to read it. Obliging, Mina opened the book and discovered a picture of the exact crystal Galma had given Rene. According to the text, this crystal was a legendary stone found only in dragon territory, formed through prolonged exposure to a mighty dragon's magical aura. Astonishingly, the book also noted that the crystal was a rare treasure, its value equivalent to Elon Musk's entire net worth, shocking Mina to her core. At that moment, Mina couldn't fathom that Galma would gift Rene a crystal gem worth billions just to shield her from the cold. Sometime later that evening, the rain poured down fiercely. Meanwhile, inside the castle, Rene was lost in her emotions. It had been a while since she'd arrived at the Demon King's castle, and even more surprisingly, she'd grown accustomed to life there. Yet, something troubled her. She couldn't understand why the Demon Lord had spared her life, and, even more perplexing, why he was treating her like a princess. Unable to unravel the mystery, Rene assumed there must be something the demon lord wanted from her. Abruptly interrupting her thoughts, Galma approached, and they exchanged pleasantries. Still, Rene remained determined to uncover why she was alive and receiving such princess treatment from Galma. Shifting the mood, Galma commented on the rain, noting that it was one of Mother Nature's blessings to mankind, but added that Eru and the others were likely upset since it would disrupt their laundry duties. Silently, Rene stared at the rain outside with a gloomy expression, lost in the moment, and noticing this, Galma snapped her back to reality by asking if she disliked the rain. Softly, Rene replied that she did, explaining that rainy days were cold for training and made it hard to find food. With her head bowed in sadness, she further shared that her only memories of rainy days were, unfortunately, sorrowful ones. Seeing how the rain weighed on Rene, Galma stepped forward, stretched out his hand, emitted dark magic, and cast a spell that shielded the castle from the downpour, conjuring sunshine to brighten the castle just to lift her spirits. Rene stood shocked as the rain vanished and the sun emerged, and while she gazed in utter disbelief, Galma remarked that sunny days were the best after all. Still, Rene couldn't stop questioning why Galma was so kind to her, not just him, but his army, who were supposed to be mankind's sworn enemies. Perplexed, she wondered why they'd chosen to treat her with such kindness and speculated it might be because she was the hero. She considered that perhaps they intended to use her to extract information about the kingdom, though Rene knew she had no such knowledge, neither about the kingdom nor its military. She'd been sent to defeat the demon lord armed only with her sword and armor. Feeling isolated, like a solitary light amid the darkness, Rene silently wished she'd never been chosen as the hero in the first place. Breaking her thought, Galma suggested they head back inside the castle, and as they began walking, Rene grew resolute to uncover why Galma, the demon lord, had been so nice to her. Yet, an uneasy feeling gnawed at her, warning that asking him directly might lead to disappointment. Trailing behind Galma, Rene also pondered what she could do to repay him and his troops for their kindness. The next day, Galma, glancing out the window, entered Rene's room, greeted her, and commented that it was a lovely day outside. Meanwhile, Rene, who'd been sleeping, stirred awake at the sound of Galma's voice and returned his greeting. However, as Rene climbed out of bed, Galma noticed that her hair was unusually long. Stunned, he demanded to know why her hair was longer than Rapunzel's. Calmly, Rene explained that she'd simply woken up that way that morning. To elaborate, she revealed that her hair had been growing like this for years. Still staring in disbelief, Galma marveled at a human with such lengthy hair, but speculated it might be a quirk unique to heroes. Suggesting a solution, Galma offered to give Rene a haircut, but she rejected the idea almost as soon as it left his mouth, insisting she could handle it herself. She told Galma she'd been cutting her own hair for years since she was a useless brokey who couldn't afford a proper trim. Intrigued, Galma pressed to know how she managed to cut her hair solo, remarking that only broke oddballs like some of the viewers would give themselves haircuts. Momentarily, Rene spaced out and then asked Galma for a sword. In the next scene, Rene stood in the courtyard wielding a sword like Samurai Jack. Simultaneously, Bands, watching in awe, asked Galma why he'd suddenly requested his sword. Galma replied, clarifying that it was Rene who'd asked for it, though he had no clue why. At that moment, Rene gently grasped the sword, drove it into the ground with force, knelt like a monk, wrapped her hair around the blade, and prepared to do something reckless before Galma and Bands rushed in, urgently pleading with her to stop. Eventually, sometime later, Rene succumbed and allowed Galma to give her a haircut. The following morning, Galma hurriedly entered the library, searching for information about Rene's unusual hair growth. After browsing a few books, he discovered that every few hundred to thousand years, a hero emerged in the human world. These heroes possessed unique traits, a blessing that enabled them to achieve feats beyond ordinary humans. Some called these heroes the children born with God's divine blessing, believed to guide the world toward balance and peace. Unfortunately, little detailed information existed about these heroes, with knowledge of them confined to folklore and legends. Moreover, books about them were penned by Zeitgeist, whose credibility was questionable at the time. Sipping his coffee, Galma felt disappointed that, despite extensive research, he still couldn't unravel the mystery behind Rene's long hair. Sometime later, Galma strolled into the courtroom and was startled to find a strange girl dressed like a maid from Pirates of the Caribbean. Galma addressed the pirate-looking maid as Raizuru and sternly reminded her that he didn't need constant guarding. Also, Galma added that there hadn't been a single reason in years for him to require a bouncer. Firmly, Raizuru disagreed, pointing out that the castle had faced an enemy attack in the past, and there was no predicting when Galma might need protection again. Furthermore, she clarified that she wasn't even on duty that day and was simply spending her free time as she pleased. Feeling guilty for his harsh tone, Galma apologized and thanked Raizru for taking her job seriously. Casually, he mentioned he was heading to Rene's room and suggested she could bodyguard him there. Still, Galma warned Raizru that she was overexerting herself with too much work and should use her free time to sign up for OnlyFans instead of trailing him like a stray cat. Nodding, Raizru acknowledged she understood. With that, they walked together to Rene's room, and while standing at the door, Galma hesitated, unsure if he should enter since it was his 100th visit to Rene's that day. Worse yet, he wondered if Rene was even awake. Suddenly, Raizru snapped him out of his thoughts, announcing she had business to attend to and needed to be excused. Galma told her she was free to go, and as Raizru departed, he pondered why Rosa always found some flimsy excuse to leave whenever they reached Rene's room. His mind raced with questions, wondering if Raizru was secretly avoiding an encounter with Rene, yet puzzling over why, if that were true, she kept following him to her doorstep. Unable to decipher Raizru's true intentions, Galma shook off his thoughts, opened the door to Rene's room, and stepped inside, only to be shocked at seeing Rene dressed in a maid's outfit. In the next scene, Mina prepared to dive right into training arranged by Galma as compensation for him taking down the wyvern that had attacked the castle previously. To make amends, Galma decided to personally assess Mina's current fighting abilities, noting it had been a while since he last trained her. Galma also explained that the test would measure how strong Mina had become, to which Mina replied saying she was eager for the challenge. Excited, Mina added that she'd been training alone for years without missing a single day. Gripping her Thor hammer, Mina declared the training a perfect chance to test her strength. Determined, Mina told Galma she was ready and demanded to know if he'd be her opponent. Galma responded that he'd considered facing her himself, but since the monsters invading the castle, like the wyvern, were larger, he'd opted to pit her against a bigger foe. With that, Galma raised his hand, released a black liquid onto the ground, and suddenly, the earth erupted, leaving Mina in total shock. Before her eyes, a towering, muscular stone golem emerged, and Galma announced it would be her opponent for the test. Cautiously, however, Galma warned the stunned Mina that the golem was incredibly strong, urging her to be careful. Spinning her hammer in the air, smirking, and striking a katana pose, Mina boasted that defeating the golem would be a piece of cake. Meanwhile, Rene, perched on a cliff, watched in horror at the sight of the monstrous golem. Galma then declared that the test would begin and promptly teleported off the battlefield to the cliff where Rene stood. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Mina braced herself to face the golem, and before engaging, she playfully thanked it for agreeing to fight her. As Galma raised his hands to signal the start of the duel, Mina wasted no time, steadied her stance, and charged at the monster. Wielding her giant hammer, she delivered a powerful swing to the golem's arm, instantly blasting it off, knowing that offense was her best defense. Thrilled that her strike landed, Mina assumed that the monster's massive size must explain its incredible slowness. However, just as she regained her footing after the successful hit, brimming with confidence that she could win the duel, the golem effortlessly regenerated its arm, shocking Mina to her core. She couldn't believe the monster could restore its limb so easily and at such an astonishing speed. Simultaneously, Rene, perched on the cliff with an awestruck expression, muttered under her breath that the golem's regenerative powers mirrored those of her former master. Intrigued, Galma asked what she meant, prompting Rene to explain that the person who'd trained her to fight in the past possessed the exact same ability as the golem. Gazing anxiously at the battlefield, Rene confided in Galma that one remarkable trait her former master had was his ability to revert to his original form after being smashed. Fascinated, Galma asked who her former master was, but before Rene could answer, the sound of the golem nearly flattening Mina against the ground stole their attention. Back on the battlefield, Mina realized smashing the golem was futile since it would just regenerate, leaving her tense as she considered her next move. Suddenly, the golem raised its hand, poised to strike again, and upon seeing this, Rene froze, immediately pleading with Galma to stop the duel. Calmly, however, Galma reassured her not to worry, explaining that Mina's clothes bore a powerful protective curse capable of deflecting attacks of all kinds. Still concerned, Rene asked if there was any chance Mina could get hurt, but Galma, to ease her fears, reiterated that all necessary precautions were in place, finally calming Rene after the second assurance. Additionally, Galma pointed out that since he couldn't use healing magic, he couldn't afford to let anyone get injured. Intrigued, Rene questioned if he truly lacked healing abilities, to which Galma confirmed it was true, then stunned her by revealing that healing and resurrection magic were specialties of her former master, leaving Rene baffled as to how he knew her master's identity. Abruptly shifting topics, Galma cautioned Rene never to mention the protective curse on Mina's clothes to her, so as not to dull her lively spirit. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, the golem relentlessly chased Mina as she darted away like a spineless wimp. Realizing the golem showed no signs of tiring no matter how long she ran, Mina understood she was only exhausting herself by fleeing. Abruptly, she stopped, turned, and charged back at the monster, aiming her hammer at its stony head. But the golem raised its hand to shield itself from the blow. In the process, its hand was smashed once more. At that moment, Galma shouted from the cliff, urging Mina to use her dumb head for once instead of relying solely on brute strength. As Mina eyed the monster, she heard Galma remind her to observe her enemy closely and find a strategic way to attack. Distracted briefly, Mina nearly missed the golem's counterattack, but by a stroke of luck, she leaped high, dodging the strike. Searching for a weakness, Mina grasped that the golem's regeneration made physical attacks futile, no matter how often she struck. Acknowledging that her magic skills were as useless as Galma's weathered face, she wondered if she even had a slim chance of winning. Still, she knew she outpaced the golem in speed, and as she smashed its hand off for the third time, Mina realized she could land a hit whenever she chose. Confidently, she refused to believe Galma would pit her against an unbeatable foe. Circling the monster, Mina racked her dense brain for a solution, and suddenly, her last two brain cells finally clicked into place. Recalling that earlier, when she'd aimed for its head, the golem had desperately shielded it with its hands, Mina noted the monster hadn't bothered blocking attacks to its arms. This suggested its arms weren't worth protecting because they regenerated endlessly. Pondering deeply, Mina hypothesized that the golem's head, so fiercely guarded, might not regenerate. Reasoning further, Mina deduced that since the golem ran on Galma's magical power, severing that source could defeat it. Armed with this insight, Mina steadied herself, focusing to sharpen her senses. With widened eyes, she locked onto the golem's face and spotted a black core embedded in the center of its head. Overcome with excitement, Mina couldn't help but loudly proclaim she'd found the solution, and without delay, she charged straight at the golem. Bracing itself, the golem prepared to retaliate, but before it could, Mina swiftly smashed off its left hand, then its right. With the monster now armless, Mina leaped skyward and, with fierce determination and focus, drove her hammer into the center of its head, shattering the core instantly. As the core broke, the golem turned to stone and crumbled to the ground. Triumphantly, Mina looked up at Galma and Rene on the cliff. With Galma gazing down proudly, Mina joyfully celebrated her victory. What adventures awaits Rene while staying in the Demon Lord's castle? Comment Demon Lord Daddy if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.